Everyone, welcome to this webinar. Hi everyone joining from live, or if you're watching this recorded, enjoy whatever it is that you're doing. My name is Audrius Janulis. I'm an industry manager here at Google Baltics. And for the last couple of years, we've been working with the most ambitious Baltic startups, founders that are looking to expand beyond the borders, capture the minds, hearts, and pockets of global consumers. It's truly a privilege to be a part of this booming ecosystem and observe it firsthand how it came to reach the tipping point that was this year. I think we kind of spilled the beans already with the title of this webinar, declaring that it was a record year for Baltic startups. It's not a secret, but today we will be looking at the report done by Dealroom recently and commissioned by Google for Startups in partnership with Atomico venture firm. We will be dissecting the best bits when it comes to Baltic ecosystem, and we will be trying to provide some of the views and opinions around the key bits that are concerning Baltic startups. For that, I've invited two distinguished gentlemen that were truly a part of this shift in a couple of last years, and I would like to introduce them now. So firstly, James, CEO and founder of Printify. James, if you could take a couple of minutes and maybe talk a bit about your background, history, and what is Printify.
Hi everyone, and thank you for inviting me and having me, and thank you to all the listeners for listening to this podcast. My name is James. I'm the CEO and founder of Printify. Printify is a platform that enables any creator, any entrepreneur to start its own business with zero investment whatsoever. You can sell mugs, hats, hoodies, pillows, bedwear, homeware, all kinds of products with zero investment. You come to our platform, you upload design, you sell it on your e-commerce store like Shopify, Etsy, WooCommerce, eBay, and so on. And whenever you receive an order, we will charge you only the cost of producing, so you keep all the margin, and we will produce the product within 24 to 48 hours and ship it directly to the end consumer. So that's briefly what Printify does. We have been around for 6 years now, and we are from Latvia, and recently raised a $50 million round.
Congratulations. We'll dig deeper about that a bit later. I bet you're also actively hiring, so probably it's a good time to make maybe a pitch for that as well. You want to take some time for that?
We have more than 70 open roles in engineering, product, data analytics, business, marketing, all around. So pretty much you can be sure that you will find something that could fit your profile. Check out our website, printify.com, and go to the jobs section.
Thank you so much, James. And another speaker joining us today is Andreas Helbig from Atomico. Andreas, as well, maybe you could talk a bit about what is Atomico, what do you do there, and what's really the connection between Atomico and the Baltic region?
Yeah, and thanks so much for having me. Look, I think we go way back because Atomico is a venture fund. We're based in London, but we were set up by Niklas Sennström, who's Swedish, but who some of you might know is the co-founder of Skype, with very strong Estonian roots, as the engineering heart of Skype was always beating in Estonia. So basically, part of the first Baltic major European tech story. And yeah, Niklas, after having exited Skype, he thought about what to do next, and he decided to set up the fund that he wished he had raised from when he was a founder. And that includes many things, but we are trying to be as entrepreneurial as it gets. We try to be actually helpful with having a great team of former operators on the team, and we're now one of the largest funds in Europe. So we are strongly supporting the Baltics, and as we have made investments subsequently in Pipedrive, in Katana, in Pactum, all of them in Estonia, so we have to make it a little further south. We are a Series A investor usually, so coming in with tickets of $5 million and above, we can write up to 40 million checks and growth rounds as well. So covering quite a wide range. So once you've hit your first product market fit, we're the right ones to talk to. And you can reach me at andreas@atomico.com. I lead our Nordics and Baltics market coverage, which is, I think, also one interesting thing is the Baltics have been a market that we've been covering since the beginning of Atomico. We have not that well covered the rest of CEE, unfortunately, but the Baltics have been something. That's why they're kind of bolted towards the Nordics, and I'm leading the Nordic market coverage there. I'm actually German, so I'm kind of the outsider in the ecosystem, which is not that much of a disadvantage given Nordics and Baltics are 8 countries to cover. I started in VC in 2015, first for a German fund, and joined Atomico a little over a year ago, where I lead our Nordic and Baltic coverage, and also very involved with our investments in Catan and Pactum in particular, as I'm a bit more of a B2B guy, which fits the Baltics.
Makes sense. Thanks so much for sharing. And you touched a good topic, I think, here. So let's maybe talk a bit about the report itself. It is available online.
Yes.
You could go to dealroom.co, and probably many of you already did. Many of you already had a chance to see it. I've seen personally a lot of snapshots working around my social networks. Everyone was sharing a bit about that. To tell you the fact, the report itself focuses on a Central Eastern Europe region, which Baltics is a part of. But today, we're not going to go fully in the whole report. We just selected the best bits when it comes to the Baltics, and we will be focusing on that. Interestingly enough, Andreas is focusing on Nordics and Baltics, and there's always a bit of a discussion, right, where the Baltics should fit. In this particular situations, we are a part in the CE region, but we will use this chance to talk about only Baltics and maybe revert to CE slightly. If you haven't read the whole report, I highly encourage you to do so. There's a lot of valuable data in it. There's a lot of interesting touch points there. But the very high level executive sort of narrative that you should take away from it is valuations and the value created in the last 10 years, 11 years from CE region has grown 19 times. And in the last 5 years, there was more than 150 billion of value created. Now, one fun fact that blew my mind when I first time I heard it was, imagine you have a startup that earns $1 per second. So it will take 12 days for you to reach $1 million in revenue. However, to reach $1 billion in revenue, it will take you 32 years, right? So we always, we have these millions and billions next to one another, and they sound similar, but I think putting this in this time frame perspective just gives you an understanding how big these numbers really are. Billions are massive numbers, and we are delivering those already in C region and in Baltics in particular. Next takeaway is the rise of venture capital and the increase. We're looking for almost like 5 billion euros in attracted venture capital for this year. We already attracted 4 billion in this year till October when the report was published, and almost half of that, 1.7 to be exact billion, actually were attracted by Baltic startups that were originated in Baltics, are still based in Baltics. So I think that's a tremendous success for a tiny region of just a bit more than 6 million people in population. And another takeaway is that the most of foreign capital is flowing into Baltics already with the help of mega rounds. So let's dive deeper into the Baltics, and let's start from, looking at some of these slides that we've selected, and I'll be inviting both Andreas and James just to provide their views and insights on some of them. So firstly, I think this is something that we can definitely be really proud of. Most valuable companies in CE since 2000, actually 4 of them out of 10 are from Baltics. There's a huge representation from Estonia. We have Wise, Skype, Bolt, and we also have Vinted from Lithuania, with a tiny mistake that it is currently headquartered in US. That's not really true. They still headquartered in Vilnius, but sometimes these happen. So maybe Andreas, I'll turn to you. We have some companies in here that are already public. Some of them were acquired, and some of them are still private. And I know that quite recently, at least in Lithuanian press, we had an article around the most valuable companies in the country. And Vinted wasn't included because it is still a private company. The valuation only comes from sharing a part of the business to the investors, while some of the other companies have confirmed valuations in the public markets. Could you take maybe a minute or so to talk about your view on, are these values accurate, and do they stand their ground once they're faced with public markets?
Yeah, well, I think they're always accurate if someone paid the valuation. So that's probably as straightforward and as simple as it is. And I think sort of particularly recently, we've seen, since probably a year and a half too, we've seen a very positive IPO window particularly for B2B companies, but also for more B2C heavy type of companies. And we've seen that the majority of companies has actually increased even their valuation through going public, either through going public in itself, but also throughout the periods once they started trading. So I think the divergence is not that high actually anymore. I think it always comes down to the individual company, of course, as well. Some private valuations might not hold in the public markets, but it can very well be the other way around. And well, I think overall tech has such a great momentum in general that we've seen public markets very much supporting that momentum. So I think private valuations are very much true.
All right, and we'll probably later in the webinar we'll try to provide some predictions and forecast what we can expect in the future as well. But moving further, we've seen that in 2021, and it's not even over, right? Baltics were managed to attract a record number, 1.7 billion euros of venture capital, which was almost half of the capital that was attracted in CEE. It's really a testament for, compared to CEE region, which has a population of probably more than 140 million people, a tiny region, Baltics, maybe just 6 million plus population, attracting so much venture capital. I would like to invite James to speak a bit, who was a big part of this and with their latest fund, with their latest round, how that came to be, what was your experience, and was it easy?
I think fundraising is always a challenge, but now we are relatively at the times where there's a lot of capital in the market, and it is a good time to raise money. And I'm very glad about our neighboring countries that have been making the bulk of the work to make the Baltics contribute to half of the capital raised, and really glad to see the large investments, and especially the slide that you showed on the value that has been created over the last 10 years. It's very, very impressive, and very eager to contribute to make sure that we continue that growth path, and in next 10 years it again would be 10 times of what it is today.
Yeah, and maybe if we look on the right side of the graph, it's probably fair to say like Estonia is leading in not only in per capita basis, but actually in absolute numbers, which is, I think, again, such a tremendous success and achievement. Interestingly enough, we have Romania in the second place. To be really fair, the majority of that is coming from just one company, right? UiPath, raised a ton of money lately, which puts them in that position. But if we would combine Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia, right, it would be just an outlier, I think, in this region. Andreas, maybe you could provide some views on how foreign investors are actually looking into Baltics and how that maybe changed in a couple of last years.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a region that is, or should be, but I think it is on everyone's radar. And I think probably Estonia here leading the pack is, we'll speak about sort of the ecosystem flywheel that past successes bear fruit to new successes, not only because of them being a role model for entrepreneurs in the region, but also because of stock option programs, etc., and therefore local angels. So yeah, I think Estonia was in a kind of fortunate position that with Playtech and Skype, it had early successes, and probably a reflection of that ecosystem flywheel is why they are here very much in the front. So I think Estonia has been on everyone's radar. Latvia and Lithuania are getting there with more and more successes, and I think we see overall a more global converging world in venture in general. in a sense that it doesn't really matter where you're based, it doesn't really matter where you're from. Investors should be looking at you anyways, and I think sort of probably there's so many US investors now also looking into the Baltic region. There's so many US funds also now coming in, so I think the Baltics are very much on the global map, not only on the European map but actually on the global map. And I think there will be even more US led rounds to come. So if someone is not covering the Baltics as a fund, then they're probably doing something very, very wrong and are definitely a few years behind.
Yeah, I think this was one of the more interesting, slides that everyone kind of were happily sharing on the social networks. VC funding per capita, right? And again, Estonia is just beating everyone essentially. Well, probably you can find some. We don't have Israel in here. Israel is probably gonna be number one in that type of. Is it? No, it's not here. But on per capita basis, like Andreas, again, I'll revert to you. Maybe we try to use this narrative quite a lot, being against small regions. But is this an impactful metric? It's definitely a signal, right, that something is happening. Entrepreneurs are really sort of successful from, in a proportion to population. But is this something that, venture firms are looking when evaluating some regions?
We're always evaluating companies. We're not really evaluating regions, I have to say. So it doesn't, for us, it doesn't really matter where the company is from, as long as, we're a European focused fund, so it should have some ties to Europe. I think it is. Of course, it's easier if you have a few successes and they're a small country, but it's also then to score high on that type of ranking. But I think being a small country forces you to think globally, and that is one thing that we see very much in the Baltics. I think Katana is my favorite example, which is a ERP for small and medium-sized manufacturers. And I think they have 3 customers in Estonia, and the rest of their customer base, which is over 1,000 customers, are coming from all around the globe. So it's a forcing function to think globally, and if you think globally from day one, it is also then more likely that you will be successful and raise a ton of venture capital in the future. And so being a small country kind of forces you to go down that route, to go down the global route, which then in return makes it more likely that small countries are scoring high on the list that we're seeing here.
Yeah, cool. I think it's fair to say that majority of this funding lately, and especially in this last year, was essentially led by mega rounds, and it's really interesting to see that they started appearing in 2017 in CE, probably with the help of UiPath, but Baltics as well. Baltics reaching this huge threshold, let's say, or a tipping point, was probably due to a couple of huge rounds by Bolt and Vinted. Maybe you could share some ideas. What does it take for a company to actually be able to raise these massive rounds? Like, what is it just sheer scale, and is it the saying goes less is more, but is in the startup world is more?
Well, the question is, what can you do with more capital? I think if you raise capital for the sake of raising capital, then it's probably not very efficient. But capital is an enabler for you to get somewhere, and you will be able to raise these mega rounds if your traction is particularly strong. I think sort of without raising 100 mil plus when you're still in the pre-revenue phase, no matter how deep and bold the vision is, that's pretty tough to do. So if you have a strong traction, and if you have a vision that goes beyond where you are right now, and capital is sort of the vector for you to get there, I think that's probably sort of the ingredient of the mega round, which is probably relatively straightforward, but showing strong product market fit and demonstrating, or at least coming up with a good plan, a good vision on how you can put the capital to work in order to then raise even more capital potentially in the future, or go public, or whatever it is eventually your end goal is. That's probably the recipe for a mega round.
Yeah. And another slide that I personally found pretty interesting is that seed rounds are mostly local ones, are coming from local firms. while of course the bigger the round, the mega rounds are coming from external or foreign capital. James, I'll maybe give the chance for you to say, how was it for you? I know for some Baltic founders it usually starts from local investors, but as far as I know your story, you immediately sort of jumped the ship, right, and went to the US. Can you maybe share some views on that?
For our business, it just made a lot of sense because our core business is in the United States, both on the supply side and on the demand side. And so the company was incorporated in the US from the day one, and the core business was there. And so it just made a lot of sense for us to look for investors in the US. And given our business specifics, it just very glad we did it. A lot of added value from the investors on building the company and scaling it quickly. And it certainly helped also in the second round with getting introductions to the top tier VC funds. And I think to add to this, I think you really have to look where your core business is. And if your core business is in Europe, it doesn't really make much sense to go to incorporate in US or try to raise from US funds. It's much less likely to raise there. So for the seed rounds, I think your best chances are locally, and if you grow really large with a global scale, then you can raise it from anywhere in the world.
Yeah, makes more sense. I know there was a saying that you have to sort of raise from the local VCs for foreign VCs just to look all right at you, right? If local VCs are not investing, so the foreign ones will definitely, will be shy. Is that still the case, Andreas? Maybe you could share on this.
No, I think that's not the case. I don't think you have to necessarily raise from a local fund. Otherwise, we would not be looking. I mean, there's so many great pan-European seed funds these days, which are also investing in the Baltics. Katana, again, being both Pactum and Katana had no local fund. And actually, when we invested, when we did the Series A, they had local angels. Then had actually in both cases a German fund doing the seed, and then we did the Series A. So it's not necessarily true that you have to get this from a local fund. There are great local funds out there, but you don't absolutely have to do this in order to be relevant going forward, as there are other great pan-European seed funds out there.
Yeah. All right, let me switch gears slightly and let's talk about bootstrapping. But before we do that, I just want to highlight for those people that are joining in live, it's so much better to join these live for one reason, because you can participate. So on the right side, you should have like a chat window where you can actually ask questions. Also, you can go to www.sli.io, that's Slido, with a hashtag of Baltic startups, and ask your questions there. We will have maybe roughly 10 minutes at the end of this webinar to cover them. Not only questions, if you have some insights as well that you would like to suggest, join the conversation. So raise capital is always highly debated because it's so public. That's one of the metrics that's really visible. But bootstrapping seems to be quite a crucial factor in CE region as well. And there was an interesting slide in this report, right, where we have 31% of bootstrap unicorns in CE compared to 7% for the rest of Europe. And in this bootstrap area, we have maybe let's say older companies that were established previously. I would like to maybe discuss this topic between bootstrapping and raising capital, but also some of the reasons maybe. And my assumption would be that at the time, there wasn't enough capital for you to raise, so you had to bootstrap anyway. That doesn't seem to be the case anymore. But I would like to hear from James. Like, what's your view on bootstrapped versus raised capital?
It's my first question is like, until what time does it count as bootstrapped, and what do you really count as a bootstrap? For example, looking at the companies here on the list as Evolution Gaming, Playtech, Printful, I would question if they are really bootstrapped and how they were bootstrapped. But answering your question, I think it's just a necessity in our region, especially back 5, 7, 10 years ago when most of those companies were started, even earlier. Um, there was not that many local VC funds, and the situation has changed a lot, even in the last 5 years when we raised well, two things I noticed. One is that there's a lot more capital locally, and you can raise much easier from, as Andres said, from pan-European funds. And another thing is that also the foreign funds now are much more comfortable investing locally. 5 years ago, to get a US investor to invest in Baltics was pretty hard. Now, I was pretty surprised when talking to VCs. Some say that as much as 50% of their new investments are outside of US, and Europe is a very attractive destination.
It's probably fair to add that there's probably quite a few, hidden secrets. Well, you're still bootstrapped. It's not that easy to assign a valuation, and until they raise, it's really hard to say if that's a unicorn or not. But we could find a couple of names that would, if they would raise, they would immediately probably get unicorn status in Baltic. So that's, I think, quite something to look forward to in the near future. Let's talk maybe a bit about B2B SaaS. So in the report, we found an interesting data, right? That CE is over-indexing when it comes to enterprise software, like by a lot, compared to 14%. With the rest of Europe, CE lands at 33%, while on health, it's the other way around. I probably understand the reason for health, but I want to maybe hear from Andreas, who's focusing on B2B, and from James, which I know that Printify is somewhere in the middle, probably between B2B, B2SMB. How come Baltics love B2B so much?
I think I think it comes back to what I said before. B2B enables you to go global much quicker. The needs of an enterprise are pretty similar, no matter if it's based in the Baltics or if it's based in the Nordics, if it's based in Germany or in the US. So an enterprise software product, you don't have to localize, maybe besides for language, that heavily in order to make it really large. And therefore, I guess it makes sense that if you come from a smaller country, but you really want to make it big on a global scale, then you probably opt for a case or an industry where this is more likely. And enterprise software is definitely that type of industry, but it's not only enterprise. I think it's also small and medium-sized businesses. I think sort of coming back to the Katana example, which is very much selling to SMBs. Well, they have customers from all over the globe, and so also SMB needs are probably comparatively uniform, and the barriers to scaling, particularly when you do product-led growth, are not that high compared to having local products. If you're Bolt and you have to launch scooters in every city, it's a lot harder to internationalize. Yeah. And not only scooters, of course, that's just one part of their massive product portfolio. But it's all very local. It's all very, very operational. And if you're an enterprise software, well, you can scale globally a lot quicker. You can add a sales force in the US. You can start selling in the US. So that's probably very much reflective of the region and why that is the case. So I think it makes sense. And being very excited about B2B SaaS in general, I think that's also another good reason on why we as Atomico, or me personally, why we like the Baltic so much.
Yeah. Would you predict that, for the future, we could expect more B2B SaaS companies, or maybe shift to B2C will start appearing again due to the available capital, learnings, know-how?
I think we'll see more in general. And I think if we think about barriers to scaling, then there's B2C companies which you can scale slightly more easily globally. I'm thinking of an Eneba here, which is the marketplace C2C for used games, which is a bit easier to share codes than it is to find local drivers and launch scooters like a Bolt would. So I think we'll see more in general. I'm not entirely sure, and I'm not sure if I'm in a position to make a prediction on where B2B versus B2C will be a stronger contributor to that growth. Otherwise, I have my internal consumer team hitting myself on the head here. But if I say B2B here, because I think we'll see an explosion in general, and where we're going to see the shift will then probably exactly depend on which are the large success stories.
Thanks so much. Let's talk about relocation and this global versus local aspect. There are a couple of interesting slides in the report as well that I found interesting. So firstly, it's a graph where the percentage of companies that relocate from their original country, and on y-axis the number of companies that raised over $1 million in funding. Probably unsurprisingly, we have Ukraine at the very far right, but Poland at the very left and at the very top. And I guess this has to do a bit with what James mentioned before, and Andreas as well, where big markets like Poland and Romania probably tend to focus on local markets from day one because they're pretty big markets, right? You can build solid business there. Well, being tiny nations, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, they probably think global from day one. This is definitely the case with Printify, where you mentioned that the majority of customers are in US already. And I just want to maybe ask Andreas, is this still the case that I know some time ago, Baltic companies had to sort of move to UK or Germany just for legislation because the foreign investors would not invest in local entities. I know this is shifting in another direction right now. Is that really the case?
Yeah, I think there's multiple layers to this question. One is, what is actually a headquarter? What is this concept anymore? And does this live in a world that is becoming more and more global, that is becoming more and more remote? Does it actually matter where the majority of employees is based? Probably less and less so. So we can debate what a relocation means. I think sort of the other very more tangible one is the jurisdiction where the company is based, and seeing how tough it is to do business and how tough it is to do investment rounds in Germany, actually, where you still have to run to the notary and sit there for a couple of hours in order to close a financing round. Germany is definitely not the go-to place. I think there is, unfortunately, a little hating on my home country here.
You have the right to do so.
I think there are definitely some things around why a US flip makes sense at some point, which include the public markets, which are just larger in the US. So that's probably one reason. I think in the US, it's I think sort of, are you buying from an OU out of Estonia, or are you buying from an Inc? Is also in the buying process is still a relevant decision factor. And in general, sort of the ease of doing business and the ease of setting up financing around stock options, etc., is easier when you have an American Inc. So I think in jurisdiction, the American flip will something that will definitely stay relevant. I would expect a lot less so a flip to somewhere in Central Europe.
Yeah, and a similar slide as well that there are ways to moving out of your home country, and I hope that James is not taking offense to being placed under fake relocation. I know this is definitely the case in some regions where companies pretend to be from other regions. I know the fun story about Vinted that their first investors were thinking that they're actually German, and almost the deal fell through just because of that when they found out they were actually Lithuanians. Is this changing? And maybe James, you could share what was your experience. Did everybody understand that this is an American company? Did it even matter when majority of the team is actually still based in Latvia?
Yeah, I wouldn't call it a fake relocation. So there is important difference for us. We are mainly portraying it as American company because we have all the manufacturing happening in US, and so both sides of the marketplace, so the supply side as well as the customer side, are something like 90% in the United States. So for us, the business is a US business, and the company is incorporated in US, etc. Where all the management is in Riga, Latvia, and we have been always very open that we are a Latvian company in all our TechCrunch articles mentioning that we are coming from Latvia. So we are proud to be Latvian and to build a company from here. And if you would look at the headcount, the number of people that are indirectly employed, like to do the production work, it would be very, very bigger in the US than in Latvia.
Alrighty, and I want to switch to the main topic probably of the whole report, and that's the flywheel effect, right? And maybe some predictions on what we can expect next. So yeah, this year was great, but it was great probably for many regions. I want to discuss how come Baltics is or can be described a bit sort of special, right? In this case, I'll use a couple of these slides here just to introduce this topic. So firstly, number of startups per million inhabitants, right? Again, Estonia, we have even higher than Israel. Lithuania is up there as well. Latvia, proudly slightly below, but also really good numbers. And the assumption, it's probably not a really scientific, but probably a lot of ecosystem players agrees that it has a bit to do with companies that were founded before and that they had this effect of producing talent, creating value and producing rich individuals that become angel investors. And rightfully so, it's called either a snowball effect or a flywheel effect. In this deal room report, we have these two sort of cycles spinning where we have high profile exits that spark a lot of talent, a lot of wealthy individuals that can either go and fund other startups or create new ones. I think that was definitely the case in Estonia with Skype, Wise, and even from Wise, probably David Hindrikus invested in multiple startups across Estonia and the Baltics. The same happening with Pipedrive, and even lately with Printify, right? So Vinted Management also invested in your last round, as far as I'm aware. So it seems that these flywheels are really beginning to spin. I would love to maybe ask Andreas to share, some views on how that came to be from Skype, since Atomico has this connection with Skype. Maybe you can share some views how that came to be.
Yeah, I think many things, and I think actually also just looking back at the previous slide, I think there are even more flywheels. One is probably sort of the fluffy almost one where it's about role models, and it's about where you can see that you can create a company that is relevant on a global scale from a small country in Eastern Europe. I think that is actually quite important. There's another one which is greater quality of employees as well, a greater quality of talents, where if you hire people who are ex-Pipedrive, etc., then there's just a different level of people that you would be getting if this company wouldn't have existed. So there's many things to the flywheel, and there's tons of more, but how that came to be in Estonia, I think it started with Skype, and it started also with the vision of very much, and I think, James, you have a good take on that as well, with incentivizing employees and enabling them to think as entrepreneurs. And Skype was always a global company, and had sort of these local cells. So the local cells had to think a little entrepreneurial. So I think it's the way that you set this up. The other one is employee stock options. I think there's so many more actually who have participated in the Skype exit, who are still hungry, who are eager to put the money to work in other companies and advise these companies on their way to scale. And I think it has a lot to do with local community building as well. There's so many great initiatives that came out of Skype or ex-Skype employees around Lift 99 in Tallinn, etc. So there's a lot of community building that is going into this, and if there are more successful entrepreneurs, the chance that there are then after that cohort, even more new generation successful entrepreneurs. That's just a very clear correlation that we're seeing in sort of this global thinking, advice, talent, but also capital. All of that coming together is something that we're. And Estonia is always our favorite example of the flywheel working. Not only because we were
and
part
probably.
of, but yeah.
It's fair to say that to fuel these flywheels, stock options is probably a crucial ingredient, right? Like the fuel for this. James, I know that you have that stock option program implemented in your company. Could you share maybe how that came to be? What was the view from the employees, from new joiners? Tell us how it goes.
First of all, I would like to say that I think we can all be very grateful to Skype, and they did an amazing job back in 2000. What was it? Before 2010, like 20 years ago, that they had issued stock options to every single employee, and that flywheel that we see happening is just amazing. How it has changed the whole ecosystem. And we were inspired, and we also decided to do the same and provide stock options to our employees. So it's a big game changer also in terms of mindset, that you know that what you do, your income is not fixed, but you will get a part of the upside. And so everyone is more incentivized to contribute and participate and make sure to maximize the chances of the company succeeding and growing really, really big. And I'm very glad that some of our early employees already have stock options that are worth over $1 million, and many are worth in hundreds of thousands. And I really hope that we will also help to foster the ecosystem in Latvia, and these people will go and build their own companies, and they will be the next success stories.
Yeah, I think there were definitely huge success stories when it comes to stock options in the US. We probably know the story about the graffiti artist that painted, Facebook headquarter walls and made roughly like 200 million on the day of IPO. I would love to have such stories from the Baltics, and there are some. But these probably, again, just become like the role models where people understand the potential outcomes of this and start probably demanding for these stock options as well, and considering this when choosing jobs. James, did you have to explain what these things are, or everyone was kind of cool with it from day one?
Absolutely, and we were among the first company to or the first to issue them to all staff employees in Latvia. We were advocating actively with our government to improve the stock option law, and I'm very glad that now we are the ranking number one by index as the easiest country in Europe, and I think worldwide, to issue stock options. And a lot of people still don't understand them, and I think it's hard to understand the value until you see somebody else making some money out of it. So it still takes some explanation, but it's already people assign much bigger value to the options than it was 5 years ago.
Yeah, Andreas, anything to add on this?
I think it's really important to retain talent. I think what we're actually seeing with a few of our Baltic companies is that the flywheel is spinning so fast that actually the biggest source or the biggest drain of talent out of a couple of our portfolio companies is actually employees starting their own businesses, which is always tough to argue against when you're a founder yourself. So aligning employees through stock options for the long term, for the long run, is of course highly important, and definitely serves as a talent retention mechanism as well.
Yeah,
as there's more and more capital available, right? I mean, we're at the discussion actually quite lately with our Estonian portfolio companies. There's only that many developers to hire and talent, and now our portfolio companies are fishing for in the same pool. and which is not always great, but definitely increasing the value or the salary levels. And I think retaining employees through stock options and making them less likely, less prone to switch is super important.
Yeah. All right. So having in mind this effect, flywheel, right? It has this idea that once it's spinning quicker and it's not stopping. When looking at this graph, right, we have CE countries on x-axis and companies rising up. I know that a couple of years ago when we did a very similar report, some of these names were like a couple of squares lower, and we see this happening. So let's try and make a prediction. Both James and Andreas, go ahead, and maybe a question is, can we expect that the next years will also be record years for the Baltic startups?
Yes. I'll start.
An easy one, right?
I'll start with that. Yes. I honestly think, I'm not sure if the growth that we see particularly in this year is something that will sustain if we reach sort of the same percentage of growth levels as that has been pretty massive. So I'm not entirely sure if that would be the case, but I think we will definitely see continued growth and continued more unicorns coming out of the region. As well, we have the flywheel. It's snowballing. It's spinning faster and faster, and there's still so many great opportunities to chase for. And I think one thing that we are when we raised the last fund, which was relatively large for the time, and I think the talk in the ecosystem was, well, are there even enough good companies in Europe to invest in? And I think this is not a question that is asked anymore, which is great. So I think it all comes down to amazing founders starting amazing businesses, and this is not something that we see stopping at all. Quite the opposite. Not sure if we will sort of reach the same level of growth that we had seen this year, as that was pretty massive, and definitely also induced by COVID and valuations increasing, etc. But it's not going to stop.
James, what's your take on this?
I'm also positive and bullish about the future. It will be hard to compete with this year. Looking at the big IPOs, and that helped a lot, and big rounds, and the other candidates that are, especially in Baltics. I think those companies that raised money should be good for some 18 months. So unless they raise late next year, this year might still is likely to retain to be the champion year.
Yeah. And so I want to use this chance and maybe remind the audience that if you're joining us live, you can still participate and go to Slido and ask your questions with a hashtag of Baltic Startups. I'll pick one question immediately, which I think fits this picture really well. So we know about the major success of UiPath here in Romania column. And the question is, can we expect that the similar flywheel will be starting to spin in Romania, and is Romania the next one to watch when it comes to CE? It's an interesting one. Andreas, James, would you care to tackle this one?
One of our partners is Romanian, so her answer would absolutely be yes. And I'm not covering Romania specifically, so not sure how well I'm personally qualified to see this. But we see more and more companies coming from Romania. Probably also reflected because one of our partners is Romanian, but we absolutely see that. We interestingly also see that in companies that are related to UiPath, so doing something in enterprise automation. So yeah, it would not surprise me at all. I don't know exactly the structures of the UiPath employee incentivization program, but it would not surprise me if that one would be the catalyst for the local ecosystem to really get going.
Yeah, I specifically looked at UiPath, and Daniel Dines, who's the CEO, his net worth is probably more than 3 billion euros, something like that. He made quite a few investments himself. Oddly, only one was actually in Romanian company. but it will be definitely interesting to watch in upcoming 5 years or so if we see a similar effect in Romania. My guess would be yes, but again, it will be very interesting to compare how it came to be in Estonia and in the Baltics, and whether that assumption and this theory of flywheel effect actually stands ground in other regions as well. Probably a typical question from the audience: what could be the next 3 unicorns in the Baltics? Which ones look the most prominent to reach the status soonest? James, I know you're certain about one for Latvia, correct? Printify is definitely going for that status sooner or later. Some other names, not necessarily from Latvia, maybe from other countries as well.
I think Verif looks like a good candidate, and
Verif I think very much looks like one, as they have also reached a certain scale already. I have to throw out Katana here, as I'm every time I have a sad day, I look into the Katana reporting, and things are going really well. So they're definitely on the rise. Not sure if they will catch up to Verif soon, but that's a great one. There's great ones also out of Lithuania, I think, to point out. Aneba is doing extremely well. Interactio, extremely great company. So good stuff everywhere.
Couple of names to add that missing from this is probably Trafi, TransferGo for Lithuania, Skeleton. Being like part of that company is actually owned by this public company. I think it's an electricity company, right, in Estonia. That's already going near that valuation as well. So this is one to watch. One news is always out there as well.
And another one to point out, I think, is Starship, as deep tech is something that is not entirely extremely prominent in the region. Starship would, of course, be a great, hopefully, I'm very much rooting for them, as that would be an amazing catalyst for more deep techy type of companies in the region as well.
Alrighty, so few other questions from the audience. This one particularly is for James. James, any advice on finding best possible angel investors in Latvia or Baltics for a marketplace? It's a marketplace business. They're looking for an angel.
I think it depends on the stage you are. Always when you are just starting out, the best chance is the 3 Fs, the friends, family, and fools. And most likely your friends and family are the fools if they are investing, because the chances are always against, but that's the entrepreneurial spirit, and people will be investing really in you because they believe in you. If you already have got to that proof of concept, MVP, and can show traction, then you already have quite some early stage investors like Atomico, like Change Ventures, and many others that I strongly suggest you to talk to. And regarding the angels, it's also always through personal networks. I have made several investments myself, and these opportunities always come through other founders, and typically that also have decided to invest or in that company.
So very much a contribution to the flywheel in Latvia as well, correct?
Very good, James.
Alrighty, another question. Does the CEO pay himself a wage from the raised capital while the startup develops, or he needs to wait for the first profits? It's an interesting one. Any one of you want to tackle this?
I'm happy to share my perspective. I think as a founder, if you haven't got to Amazon, I think didn't get to break to making profit for the first 25 years. So definitely don't wait that long. If the question is about that the company is making no revenue whatsoever, I would suggest just being very scrappy. Take the pragmatic approach and take for your salary enough so that you are okay with living, because I think the most important thing is that you are just super focused on building your company and maximizing the chances of the company succeeding, and that you don't have to over optimize on your own time and trade-offs and doing some other side things, etc. So take enough money for yourself so that you can pay your bills, you take care of your family, and be 100% focused of your time on helping the company succeed.
Yeah, I think 100% agree, and I think if your investors, the ones that you raise capital from, if they push back on salary, that's not a good sign, unless your demand is completely outrageous. But then you maybe have to question yourself. But of course, you can't build a great business if you struggle to make ends meet at home.
Yeah.
So one of the member of the audience mentions that, as others pointed out, there are some diamonds in the Baltics that would be unicorns if they raise capital, but they're not in the report. Why is that? It's probably an easy one. It's really hard to assign value for them, right? I mean,
Yeah.
while the company is still private, they didn't have like a round. It's really who is to judge what's the valuation of the company. Hence, they're not here. I know that there were some jokes that some companies should just raise just tiny bit of capital for a tiny share of the company just to set the valuation and set the record straight that, hey, we're a unicorn by now. Not sure if that's really a clever thing to do, but hopefully that answers your question. Andreas, this one is for you. What are some key points or characteristics that VCs look for in a company during seed rounds? So key points for a seed round.
Yeah, we usually do Series A, so I have to calibrate my view a little. But what is this even these days? What is even the round level? So for seed rounds, we are absolutely looking for it's the easiest thing that is being said, but we're always looking for the strongest teams out there, and I think you can demonstrate that at seed round by having a very clear understanding of your current business and the more immediate next steps that you need to take in order to. You probably will not have proven product market fit at the seed round already, but you will probably have some indications for it as you've been speaking to customers and have like made your first few sales. So combining that clear pragmatic view on what to do next, what are the things I need to hit in the shorter term to get to product market fit, but combining this with a long-term vision of, well, in 10 years, I think the market that we are operating in will look like this, and this is the way that we're playing a role in this. So I think this is just trying to make slightly more tangible what we are investing in great teams, what every investor says, what that actually means. So that's one thing. I think at seed round, you should have at least something to show, which is still the definition of a seed round. So you should have a product that's ready. You should have talked to first customers, made your first few sales. I think that's probably still a characteristic of what a seed round is. One thing that I always get extremely excited about is when customers sing the praises. So if Katana example, there was a Series A, but if you look at how well they're received on G2 and how much customers are raving about them, that was one thing that really got us over the line there. If you can get that already at the seed round, that would be most amazing. If your customers or the ones that you're piloting the product with really are your biggest fans.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I see you're a huge fan of Katana. Anyone's in the market for such software, go ahead and try it now and become a user.
And start working there.
Exactly. All right. So probably the last question. We have a couple of minutes left. You talked a lot about talents. What talents are you looking for the most? What people are most lacking in Baltic region? James, maybe you can tackle this.
I think, as in any tech company, engineering is the most scarce resource and is necessary so much. Number one, engineering. I think then product people, so technical product people, and followed by marketing, I would say, specialists, high level, large scale marketing specialists would be I would rank like number 3. Andreas, how would you see
Yeah.
that?
I think the biggest bottleneck is for sure developers. On the flip side, there is great world-class developers in the Baltics. I think sort of ones where there's on world-class level, we might be lacking a view is exactly go-to-market and sales. I think that's one where I think we need to step up a little on talent. I think US sales reps are on balance still a lot better than European sales reps in general, unfortunately. So that's one thing that we're lacking. I think talent is lacking everywhere. I think that's the big point. As companies continue to grow, continue to have demand for talent. So if you're looking for a career in tech and if you're a participant of this webinar and still think about going into the industry, well, you better should.
Alrighty, and time is almost up. This hour went past in a blast. So thank you so much for everyone for joining. Thank you so much, Andreas and James, for tuning in and providing your view and insight. I highly encourage everyone, if you haven't done so yet, go to dealrun.co, download the report, familiarize yourself with it. Plenty of rich data in there that will definitely be interesting to read. So again, thanks so much for being with us, and hopefully we'll see you soon in near future.
Andreas, thank you for having us, and thank you to all the listeners.
Yes. Thanks from my side as well, and thanks for making this such a great ecosystem, all of you.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.